In the summer of 1942, after a series of devastating setbacks that included the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor and the fall of Guam and the Philippines, the United States finally experienced some positive developments in the Pacific theater. The U.S. Navy, with the support of naval intelligence, had begun to recover and scored important victories at the Battle of the Coral Sea in May and the Battle of Midway in June. Earlier that April, Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle led a daring bombing raid on Tokyo that, while causing limited physical damage, significantly lifted the spirits of the American public and armed forces. This sequence of successes helped restore American morale, which had been deeply shaken. Service members, newly buoyed by these victories, carried themselves with a sense of pride and anticipation, eager to take the fight to the Japanese. Among them, the Marines were especially impatient, burning with the desire to avenge their comrades who had been lost during the defense of Wake Island and Guam. In August 1942, the opportunity finally came. Marine forces were dispatched to the Solomon Islands, specifically to Guadalcanal, where they intended to challenge Japanese control. These troops were no longer under-equipped or inadequately trained. They had been better prepared, more effectively armed, and were confident that they would quickly overcome enemy forces, clear the islands, and return to Australia to enjoy the relief of safety and comfort. But this confidence was soon met with harsh reality. Following the initial landings on August 7th on Tulagi and Guadalcanal, the Marines were subjected to constant aerial assaults from Japanese planes. Their anti-aircraft defenses were insufficient, making it difficult to secure the beachhead. Japanese destroyers roamed the surrounding waters, targeting American vessels, while artillery from shore added to the mounting pressure. Just 2 days later, on August 9th, the U.S. Navy withdrew its ships from the area, citing the extreme risk posed by the enemy's air and artillery capabilities. This sudden retreat left the Marines stranded, facing uncertainty and fear. The danger of isolation became chillingly real, and some believed they would not make it off the island alive. One Marine would later recount the terrifying belief that none of them would survive the ordeal. In the midst of confusion and hardship, the Marines were determined to strike back. On August 12th, intelligence reports suggested a promising opportunity near the Mataniko River, close to the American positions. A patrol claimed to have seen a white flag, and a Japanese sailor, reportedly intoxicated with alcohol provided by American troops, claimed that a large number of Japanese soldiers were starving and prepared to surrender. This news stirred hope among some commanders, who thought this might be a rare chance to neutralize an enemy force weakened by hunger and demoralization. The original plan was simple. A group of 25 Marines would travel by boat from the landing beaches, land west of a point known as Point Cruz, and return before dark. However, officers decided to modify the plan. Instead of returning the same day, the patrol would move overland toward Kukum and spend the night in a protected area. This would allow the patrol to gather intelligence about the terrain and enemy movements. Only hours before departure, Lieutenant Colonel Frank Goettge, who served as a division intelligence officer, revised the mission based on the new information from the Japanese prisoner. He was convinced that the enemy forces near the Mataniko River were genuinely ready to surrender. He persuaded his commanding officer, Major General Alexander Vandegrift, to authorize the mission by asserting that hundreds of Japanese troops were willing to give up. Although Vandegrift gave his approval, he warned Goettge not to land between the river's mouth and Point Cruz, as enemy forces had recently been seen in that area. The landing was to be conducted farther to the west to avoid heavy resistance. Despite their limited experience with jungle warfare and reports of Japanese brutality in China, the American troops did not fully anticipate the danger they were walking into. Goettge assembled a team composed of intelligence and medical personnel, including Lieutenant Malcolm Pratt and Captain Wilford Ringer. Among the group were also Marines with reputations for bravery and dependability, such as Sergeant Frank Few and Corporal Monk Spaulding. However, in order to keep the group within the 25-man limit, several combat-trained riflemen were replaced by intelligence officers, a decision that would later have tragic consequences. The patrol gathered near the Higgins boat designated to take them beyond Point Cruz. Expectations of a firefight were in the air, but confidence remained high. The plan was now to leave at around 6 p.m., land, spend the night ashore, and move inland the following morning. Unfortunately, the plan quickly unraveled. Goettge struggled to identify the intended landing site, and the boat ended up too far east, alarmingly close to where Japanese troops had recently been active. The noise of the boat's engine alerted enemy soldiers, and when the boat struck a sandbar, the sound of reversing engines echoed ominously into the jungle, signaling the Americans' presence. The landing itself violated earlier warnings to avoid that particular area. The Marines had no choice but to disembark and wade through shallow water to the beach. Once ashore, Goettge led the team a short distance inland before pausing to establish a defensive perimeter. He instructed most of the men to stay put, while he, Captain Ringer, Sergeant Custer, and the Japanese prisoner ventured further into the dense jungle in search of the supposed defectors. Their search ended abruptly in tragedy. Almost immediately, gunfire erupted. Ringer and Custer, who had been wounded, scrambled back toward the beach. Goettge and the Japanese soldier were both killed. Ringer managed to pull Custer out of immediate danger as bullets flew past them. Throughout the night, the Marines on the beach defended their precarious position against a larger concealed Japanese force. Dr. Pratt worked tirelessly to care for the wounded despite the incoming fire. Hoping Goettge had survived, Marines shouted his name into the darkness. Corporal Spaulding and Sergeants Few and R volunteered to enter the jungle in search of him. When they found his body, it was clear he had been killed by gunfire. Spaulding returned to the beach, while Few remained behind, only to be surrounded along with R by Japanese troops. In the confusion, Few mistook a nearby soldier for an ally and called out to him. The response came in the form of a violent bayonet attack. Few, wounded, managed to fight back, killing the attacker and then using a pistol to dispatch another. Later accounts described Few's actions in detail. Confronted by another enemy soldier, Few deflected a bayonet thrust with his weapon, then struck back with deadly force. He rescued R, eliminated a sniper hiding in a tree, and swapped out R's jammed weapon for a functional one. When another Japanese soldier emerged, Few shot him as well. Despite being heavily outnumbered, Captain Ringer organized a tight defensive formation on the beach. The Marines had limited visibility, making it difficult to pinpoint enemy positions, while the Japanese fired with deadly precision. Machine gun and rifle fire tore through the perimeter. Dr. Pratt was hit while tending to a wounded comrade and later died from his injuries. With no radio to call for reinforcements, the Marines resorted to firing tracer rounds into the sky in a desperate attempt to alert friendly forces at Kukum. Although the flares were seen, confusion over their purpose meant that no help was sent. The Goettge Patrol, launched with the hope of a swift and bloodless surrender of enemy troops, instead ended in disaster. The Americans had underestimated both the terrain and the enemy, and the result was a deadly ambush that claimed the lives of many brave men. The episode would serve as a grim lesson in the harsh realities of jungle warfare and the unpredictability of combat in the Pacific. Desperate and surrounded, Captain Ringer knew that waiting for help was no longer enough. He needed someone to swim to Kukum and bring reinforcements. Sergeant R, a seasoned scout with strong swimming skills, volunteered for the mission without hesitation. Stripping down to just his helmet, socks, and shoes, with a pistol tucked inside his helmet. He crawled under enemy fire until he reached the water's edge. After untying his boots, he waded quietly into the sea and began to swim, using the breaststroke to keep his helmet and weapon above water. As he made his way parallel to the shore, he occasionally had to climb over jagged coral that cut his skin. He bore the pain in silence, crawling when necessary, and avoiding Japanese patrols moving along the coastline. During his dangerous journey, he spotted a shadowy figure on the beach and fired at it, unsure if he had hit anyone, and then kept moving. Exhaustion set in quickly, but the thought of his fellow Marines still stranded and fighting for their lives gave him the will to press on. Eventually, he discovered an abandoned native boat riddled with bullet holes. He shoved it into the water, climbed aboard, and used a wooden plank to paddle the last 2 miles to the Marine lines. As he approached the friendly perimeter near Kukum, a sentry challenged him for the password of the day. Too worn out to remember it, R shouted a word he believed the Japanese could not pronounce. Million. Repeating it over and over again, he finally convinced the Marine Guard that he was not the enemy. By around 5:30 in the morning, he staggered ashore, his body covered in coral cuts, and his energy nearly gone. Marines wrapped him in a blanket and quickly brought him to report what had happened. Meanwhile, back at Point Cruz, Captain Ringer and the handful of remaining men were trying to hold off the Japanese assault. The enemy advanced slowly and deliberately through the darkness, taking every opportunity to finish off the surviving Americans. Fewer than 10 Marines were still alive from the original group of more than 20. Sergeant Custer had been shot again, and Sergeant Few found himself so close to enemy machine gun fire that he could nearly feel the heat of the muzzles. The Americans had no choice but to fire blindly into the darkness, hoping to hit something, while the Japanese, armed with muzzle suppressors, remained nearly invisible. Their ammunition was dwindling, and they were beginning to lose hope. Ringer still had no idea if Sergeant R had made it to safety, and after hearing gunfire not long after R departed, he feared the worst. Not willing to take chances, he sent another Marine, Corporal Spaulding, on the same mission. About an hour after R's departure, Spaulding stripped down and slipped into the water. Like R, he swam through the night, resting briefly when necessary, and even crawling onto the shore at one point where he mistakenly approached a fire, thinking it belonged to friendly forces. To his horror, it was a Japanese encampment. Fortunately, he was not seen and managed to sneak back into the sea and continue his journey. He arrived at Kukum about an hour after R and was also nearly shot by a jumpy Marine Guard before he managed to convince him of his identity. As the sun began to rise, the situation at the beach became untenable. Only Sergeant Few, Captain Ringer, and one other Marine were still in any condition to fight. Understanding that remaining on the beach meant certain death, Ringer made a final decision. He led the remaining men into the jungle in the hope of escaping detection. But they had only moved a short distance when one of the corporals was struck and killed by gunfire. Ringer and the last man made it to the edge of the jungle, but were cut down in a final volley of bullets. Sergeant Few, still alive, saw a Japanese soldier firing on another Marine. He aimed his .45 pistol and shot the attacker, but the grim reality had set in. He was now alone. With no other option, Few knew he had to run. Stripping down to his underwear, he sprinted into the sea under enemy fire. Once far enough from the beach, he turned to look back and saw a chilling sight. In the morning light, he witnessed Japanese soldiers surrounding the wounded Marines and cutting them down with swords. The flash and glare of steel in the sun marked one of the first moments that revealed the true brutality of the Pacific War. Few couldn't stay any longer. he dove beneath the surface and swam in zigzags to avoid the machine gun fire now aimed at him from the beach. Even with the sharks that prowled those waters, he pressed on, desperate to survive. Swimming more than 4 miles while fighting exhaustion and the ocean's current, he eventually made it ashore near Kukum around 8 o'clock in the morning. Barely able to stand, his body torn and bleeding, he collapsed on the beach and was quickly helped by fellow Marines. Now reunited with R and Spaulding, the 3 men confirmed the magnitude of the disaster. Word spread quickly, and a new patrol was hastily organized in the hope of finding survivors. Believing that Goettge had landed at the correct location, a force including Company A, 2 platoons from Company L of the 5th Marines, and a light machine gun section moved west of Point Cruz. While 1 platoon and the machine gun section headed inland, Company A moved east along the coast and was soon pinned down by enemy fire near the mouth of the Mataniko River. After a tense search of the area, all units returned to Kukum, empty-handed. Reports about what they found varied. One Marine scout, Private Donald Langer, said he saw limbs sticking out of the sand, a haunting reminder of the ambush. Others believed that heavy rain had washed the bodies out to sea before another patrol could recover them. Whatever the true fate of the remains, the consequences of the Goettge Patrol rippled throughout the Marine Corps, the military command, and the American home front. Nearly the entire intelligence section of the division had been wiped out in a single, ill-planned operation. The shock led many officers to be far more cautious with the press and more skeptical of enemy intentions. The patrol's fatal flaws were clear in hindsight. The group should never have gone out at night. Doing so gave the Japanese a massive tactical advantage. Worse still, Goettge had led his men into unfamiliar jungle terrain without confirming the size or position of the enemy forces. His belief in the surrender story, given by a captured Japanese sailor, proved to be a tragic mistake. In the years after the war, Marines who had survived Guadalcanal or studied the battle were deeply affected by the memory of the Goettge Patrol. One veteran, Grady Gallant, described the aftermath as a moment of stunned realization. Marines were shaken that they had been deceived so easily, misled by what turned out to be a cruel trap. The notion that so many well-trained men could be lost so quickly, and with so little gained, was hard to accept. When war correspondent Richard Tregaskis published Guadalcanal Diary, which included a detailed account of the patrol, American readers were horrified. The book brought the grim episode into national focus. A later Hollywood adaptation of the book included a harrowing scene in which a Marine, modeled after Sergeant Few, looks back in horror as wounded Americans are slaughtered with swords. The Goettge Patrol became more than just a failed reconnaissance mission. It was a symbol of a war that would only grow more ruthless. Details of the massacre emerged slowly, with reports that one Marine had his hands severed and another his tongue cut out. For the men who had been there, and those who heard about it afterward, the conclusion was inescapable. The Japanese had lured the patrol into an ambush. Many Marines came to believe that if the enemy was willing to wage war with such cruelty, then no quarter should be given in return. The phrase, "no prisoners," quietly began circulating among the troops, not as an official policy, but as an unspoken code. That brutal shift in mindset would have lasting effects on the conduct of the Pacific War. Eugene Sledge, a Marine who later fought in Peleliu and Okinawa, and wrote about his experiences in With the Old Breed, recalled asking a veteran why the Goettge Patrol had been massacred. The answer was blunt and chilling. Because they're the meanest sons of bitches that ever lived. Sledge noted that the hatred Marines felt for the Japanese was unlike anything else. It wasn't some distant, abstract enemy. It was immediate, personal, and overwhelming. Denying that hatred, he later wrote, would have been as dishonest as denying the bonds of brotherhood or the drive to survive. This emotional and psychological shift helped shape the violent, unforgiving nature of the war in the Pacific. The Goettge Patrol, remembered in grim detail by those who fought and by those who came after, marked a turning point. It was the moment when Marines realized they were facing a brutal, merciless enemy, and that the only way forward was through equally fierce determination. If you found this story powerful, make sure to follow for more real accounts from the front lines of history. This has been another deep dive into the past, brought to you by WW2 Reels.